privilege of being one of the pastors here at First Baptist Church of Decatur. And on behalf of First Baptist Church, I want to officially welcome you here this evening for the purpose of gathering around the written word. Whether you are physically in our space here or you are joining us through the magic of Livestream, it is an honor for us to be in your presence and vice versa. So thank you for taking time out of your evening for this purpose. It should come as no surprise that we here at a church value the written word. We value the written word because we believe that a good story can speak truth in ways that mere facts often cannot. We believe that a good story can challenge and convict and unsettle. A good story can bring us together, and it can keep us always asking questions. So it is a gift when we get to come together tonight over good stories, to learn from gifted authors who tell a compelling story, and we can be in their presence for an evening to learn what truths they will teach us and what questions they will give us. So thank you for being with us here this evening, and we hope to see you here the next few Thursdays as we do this throughout June. Thanks. And I'm going to introduce Joe, who is the head of Georgia Center for the Book.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shelley. It's wonderful to be here at the church and, of course, to kick off the Joshilyn Jackson Summer Reading Series. Many of you may know this is our third outing with this particular series that was originally planned as a stage at the Decatur Book Festival. And then due to the pandemic, we pivoted and did this series online and continued doing it last year. And when we approached Joshilyn Jackson and her cohorts, Nikki Salcedo, they agreed to do it again and did a wonderful job picking all of the books that we are going to be reading in the next few weeks this summer. Just so you all have all of those dates ready to go, on the 16th, we'll be back here talking to Denny Bryce. She will be in conversation with Carmen Tanner Slaughter. On the 23rd, Piper Hewley and Louis Bayard will be here. That is a Jackie O themed night. It's very interesting. His book is called Jackie and Me, and Piper has written a book about an African-American seamstress who sewed ball gowns and clothing for the upper crust in New York society, including Jackie Bouvier at that point in time. And of course, we will close out the series on the 30th with Sonali Dev, who does a wonderful job with Jane Austen-inspired novels. So join us for those, and as you saw, several of our programs that we are doing in person over at the library, including on the 14th, B.A. Shapiro will be talking about her new novel, Metropolis. We would also like to, of course, thank some of the sponsors for the Decatur Book Festival. Once again, we will be back here in October at the church with a wonderful selection of authors, but we could not do it, of course, without the support of the community. Emory University, once again, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the City of Decatur, Georgia Humanities, our host, the DeKalb County Public Library, and of course, First Baptist Church, for not only giving over their venue and their time and their volunteers, but they are a wonderful partner with so many of our literary events here in Decatur. I'd also like to remind you, being part of the DeKalb County Public Library, that if you are reading books this summer, you can participate in the Adult Summer Reading Program that the library is sponsoring. So there's bookmarks in back. You can sign up on an app called Beanstack. It will record all of the time that you have spent reading over the summer. You can win some fabulous prizes. And also get the benefit of reading some fantastic books at the same time. Right now, I'd like to introduce our guests this evening, and I do want to apologize. Joshilyn is, of course, a bit under the weather tonight, so we have a substitute for Joshilyn, who is a fantastic author in her own right, and she is going to do a fantastic job for us. Her name is Ginger Eager, and she is the author of The Nature of Remains. It, of course, was the AWP winner for Best Novel. She was a Georgia Author of the Year in 2021, and The Nature of Remains was on the 2021 list of books all Georgians should read. Joshilyn, of course, not only writes thrillers, but loves the genre so much, and she has picked two fantastic debut novelists for us tonight. Samantha Allen is the author of Pay Dirt Road, which is the winner of the Tony Hillerman Prize. And you would not be shocked to find out that you may have seen her around town selling books at an event or two, because she was a former bookseller here in Atlanta. She is being joined tonight by Grace D. Lee, who is the author of Portrait of a Thief, which is now currently in development for Netflix. So without further ado, would you please join me to welcome Ginger Eager, Samantha Allen, and Grace D. Lee.
Hello, everyone. I'm not Joshilyn Jackson, but I'm playing her at the Decatur Book Festival. It's great to see you guys. It's wonderful to be here in person, right, after the past couple of years. And we have two fantastic books that we're going to discuss tonight. I've read both of these in the past couple of days, and I could not stop turning the pages. So we're going to start with a short reading from each of our authors, just to sort of wet your whistle, and then we'll move into the conversation. You want to start us off?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Lee. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this conversation. My debut novel, Portrait of a Thief, came out this April, and it is a heist novel about Asian American college students stealing back looted art from Western museums, and inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from museums around the world. So I will be reading just a bit from the very first chapter. State your name for the record, please. This was how things began. Boston, on the cusp of fall, the Sackler Museum robbed of 23 pieces of priceless Chinese art. Even in the museum's back room, dust catching the slant of golden, late afternoon light, Will could hear the sirens. They sounded like a promise. Will Chen. And what were you doing at the Sackler Museum, Mr. Chen? I work here part-time. I'm an art history student at Harvard. Did you see anything unusual before the theft? No. Describe what you saw during the incident. Any distinguishing features of the thieves, anything the security cameras might not have caught. It all happened very fast. I looked up from my essay and the alarms were going off. When I ran into the gallery, they were already leaving. They had on ski masks, black clothes. He hesitated, just for a moment. I think they were speaking Chinese. For a moment, the only sound was the scratch of the detective's pen against his notepad. I see. Do you speak Chinese, Mr. Chen? Yes, does it matter? I couldn't really make out what they were saying. The alarms were going off at this point. Of course. And do you know what they stole? Will thought back to that empty room. If he closed his eyes, he could fit the pieces back where they were supposed to go. A pair of jade tigers, a dragon vase, a jade cup with 3 crested bronze birds, mid-flight. Not really. I've been gone all summer. The detective slid a sheet of paper across the table. Can you read the title of this for me? It was a printout from the Harvard Crimson from late August. Will swallowed hard. What is ours is not ours. Chinese art and Western imperialism. Did he write this? Yes. The detective leaned forward, his fingertips touching. Tell me if this sounds suspicious to you. A Chinese student writes an article about looted art, and a few weeks later, Harvard's largest collection of Asian art is robbed. All the priceless pieces mentioned in the article, gone. Will leaned back in his chair. The golden light made everything feel like a painting, and he let his mind drift for a moment, thinking of the paper on Renaissance art that was due next week, the sculpture he still had to finish for his portfolio. Not particularly. And why is that? I was born in the US. Detective Will looked for a badge, a name. Myers. Detective Myers. What is your... I'm Chinese American, Will said, lingering on the American. He adjusted the rolled up cuff of his button down, imagining how his sister would handle this situation. You said I was Chinese, but I was born and raised in the US, just like you, and I work part-time at the Sackler, and 3 weeks ago, the Crimson published a paper I wrote for an art history class at Harvard. Last time I checked, none of those are crimes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have homework to do. This is procedure, Mr. Chen. I just have a few more questions, if you will. Will rose. It might have been a small thing, to be called Chinese instead of Chinese American, to have this detective who spoke in a Boston accent look at him as if this place, this museum, this art didn't belong to him. But it didn't feel like a small thing. Not when he was at Harvard, this place of dreams, and he was so close to everything he had ever wanted. It was his senior year, and the whole world felt on the verge of cracking open. I've told you everything I know, he said, and I know my rights. Next time you want to accuse me of something, go through my lawyer. In Eliot House, with his window open to the warm evening air and the distant sound of chatter in the courtyard, Will took a single jade tiger out of his pocket.
So exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was looking out a couple of times. Everyone's like that. All right, will you read for us?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about what your book is about. And
Sure.
give us a taste.
I'm Samantha Jayne Allen, the author of Pay Dirt Road, which also came out in April. It's my debut novel, and it is a mystery set in a small town Texas and featuring Annie McIntyre, who has just graduated from college and is kind of adrift. And she comes home and she ends up working with her grandfather, who is the retired sheriff in the town, in a private investigation firm, when one of her coworkers at the cafe where she's waitressing goes missing. So I'm going to go ahead and read from the beginning too. Chapter 1. At night, we rode up to the old railroad tracks on the west side of town, turned the headlights off, and waited for the dead to appear. My cousin Nikki and I had seen the phantom lights of the old passenger trains, maybe, just once when we were kids and sneaking out, but it was, and I believe this even at 12, likely a trick of the light, our eyes bleary and tired. And still, whenever we went cruising, this was the place we ended up, staring into the dark, wishing to be scared. Annie, why do we come out here? Nikki said, her blonde curls making a funny halo around her wide, sharp-boned face. Something besides doing donuts in the Walmart parking lot? I squinted my eyes, but the only speck of light was from a cell tower past the interstate, miles ahead and outside of town. You see anything? I ran my fingers lightly up her arm like a spider, and she swatted me. God, we're so lame, she said, and tugged on the tight-fitting halter top she decided to wear. Without checking the mirror, I knew I'd already smudged my new liquid eyeliner. We're so lame, this was your idea, I said, and turned the ignition. We're all dressed, might as well get a drink somewhere. Where? Mixers. Headlights on, a cloud of dust swirled in the beams. A tremor of fear. Was something circling our car in the dark? But branches swayed in the trees, and I realized it was just the wind picking up. We bounced in our seats as I drove over the rickety tracks. And just you and me sit on the bar stools with all the sad folk. Come on. You know you can't go in there before midnight. Besides, I'm starving. Let's go by the cafe for a bit. That'll give my sources time. Got to be something happening. It's Thursday, practically the weekend, Nikki said, and checked her phone again, sent a few texts, and I drove down the empty farm-to-market road, elbow out the open window. The night air was just cool enough to tickle my skin. The wind was all it was, just coming a storm. I like mixers. They have a band, I said. I knew it was lame, but old dives like those had no pretenses of being anything but dives. I was burned on college bars and frat boys. Sure, the band is usually the Donaldson kid, who may or may not be out on parole. Hey, you sure you want to eat at the cafe? There's usually snacks up at the bar. It's 9. Everywhere else is closed. And no, I don't want to eat stale popcorn everyone's dug their dirty paws in. Fair enough, I said, and turned right toward town.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful writing. So one thing that actually didn't strike me about these books until I was reading reviews to prepare questions for you is that they're both coming-of-age novels. And then I went back and I thought about the characters, and you've both just read examples. They're in their early 20s. They're just setting out on their own, and they have lots of questions that I associate with that period of time, like what sort of job am I going to get, and where will I live, and who do I love? But then they have these questions, and I think this is why I didn't realize at first that they're coming-of-age novels that I still have as a middle-aged woman that have to do with disillusionment and what they've been sold, like the myth of the meritocracy and the myth of the American dream. And so I would just love to hear you guys speak to why you picked that particular period in a human life and creating these characters.
Sure. Forgot we're alternating turns. So I was drawn to write about coming-of-age moment, I think because, like you said, it is a time for having your eyes opened up. And for Annie, my main character, when she comes home, she wants so badly to keep believing in kind of the nostalgia that draws her back, and there is some of that. The good memories are there too, but she has to grapple with her personal problems from the past in order to end up solving the mystery. And so I wanted those two threads to be intertwined. I think that crime fiction and coming-of-age fiction really go well together because it oftentimes takes a triggering event, something tragic, or something that changes your opinion about everything you once knew to bring about that personal growth.
Yeah, beautifully said. I agree with all of that, especially just how, change in your personal life can be spurred by external factors. And so I actually started thinking about the idea of Portrait of a Thief when I was a recent college grad. I was in my early 20s. I was living alone in New York City, and when I learned about these real-life thefts of Chinese art, for a moment I thought, what would I say if someone asked me to do that? And so I really wanted to write a story where the thieves weren't expert criminals, but ordinary Chinese Americans, and I wanted them to be, at the cusp of graduating college, in their early 20s, at this point where their life is really completely about to change. And so it has a lot of their excitement, but also a lot of their fears about who will they be, who do they want to become, and whether they'll get there, all in the context of something that is as exciting and terrifying as a heist.
Oh, that's a great answer. Yeah, it was very, I think what struck me most in Pay Dirt Road is that Annie has believed that she can go to college, right, and that's going to create this life for her, and it isn't. And in Portrait of a Thief, it's similar. Everyone has believed that they can go to college, and they've wildly succeeded, and they don't necessarily want the lives that they're going to get. I love that. And so I'm very curious to you about the process of writing these books, so is yours set in the recession of 2009, Samantha? Do I have that right?
Yes, the recession is, loosely based on when I graduated college in 2011, which was, right in the middle of the recession. Very hard to find your way after school. But now it's like kind of ambiguous in the book because I was like, I don't know.
Oh, I completely recognized it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and then in Portrait of a Thief, we have the background of COVID and of the Black Lives Matters activism, which was I was amazed that you've already worked that into a book that just came out in 2022. So I want to know, like, when you guys started writing, and if you were already in the process, Grace, and sort of changed as those events occurred. I want the scoop.
Yeah, so I had started writing this book sometime in 2018, and I spent, years struggling with the first few chapters. And then when the pandemic came around, I came back to this book really because it was a book I wanted to read. I wanted to read about Asian Americans and children of immigrants who are able to move freely and fearlessly throughout the world, to find joy, to go on adventures at a time where so many of us were trapped inside our houses. We were dealing with all the fallout of the pandemic. And at the same time, because we were living through the pandemic every day, I couldn't quite imagine writing a book where the pandemic didn't exist, but I also didn't want to write a book set in that time because we were living it every day. And so as I was writing it, I wanted to imagine a future that was past the pandemic, one that was hopefully more equitable, one where we still live with a lot of the scars and the losses of everything that happened with COVID, but also we are able to move on as best we can. And so that was my way of feeling a bit of hope as I was finishing the first draft of this book in the summer of 2020.
Oh, I can see that. And they got to try the cities that they get to go to, and the apartments that they get to stay in, and the cars that they get to drive, and the food that they get to eat. I mean, I felt like I went on an around-the-world trip. So I can imagine that was really a relief to be able to write that while we were all on lockdown.
Like Gracie said, I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read, so that was kind of the point where I started working on Pay Dirt Road. I had written kind of a coming-of-age novel when I was getting my MFA at Texas State University, and then I kind of put it away after I left school, and then I revisited it, and I was like, no, the spark's not here for me. And so I decided to start over, and I was like, I want to write a mystery novel because I love mysteries, and I just, I had the idea for the crime plot in my mind, but then when I started writing it, a lot of the voice from the coming-of-age novel that I had written as my thesis was still there, and so there's a lot of similarities. It feels a little bit more like an evolution of that book now that I look back on it, even though I started over before the pandemic. And so, this book I was taking it out to publishers right when the pandemic started, and so it does feel like a completely different world when I wrote this and when it started out on the journey. So it's been a strange time.
The town is so evocative, Garnett, Texas.
Thank you.
I wouldn't be able to identify Garnett, Texas if I walked into it tomorrow. Well, both of these books, I would imagine, took a fair amount of research. I mean, the art heist, the way to break into a museum and to get out of a museum, the drag car racing and the whole world of drag car racing, that was so exciting, and I had never thought about most of these things. And then the private investigator, I know nothing about being a PI, right? But there were lots of little legalities. And then you also bring in fracking and big oil, and who is preyed upon by our shared needs for big oil. So talk to me about research.
Sure. So another kind of something that I wanted to explore with the coming of age and mixing that with a detective novel was, I was like, what does an origin story for a PI look like? I mean, how do you get into this, and what's the training like for that if you're not a police officer or former military or something like that? And so a lot of the research for being a PI was like me just thinking like, okay, if I were Annie, what would I be doing here? Like, what would I wonder about. And so it kind of was like me teaching myself about being a PI as I was letting her learn how to be a PI. And a lot of what I researched was just reading PI novels because I love them. And I think that you can just kind of learn the rhythms of the investigation very well from revisiting the kind of more fictionalized, like fun, plotty parts of that. For the fracking parts, I remember I had read an article about how in Texas that a lot of times mineral rights on a piece of land can be sold separately from the parcel of land. So you could own a house in a neighborhood and then find out that someone had sold the mineral rights under your feet to be exploited. And so that was kind of the seed that got me started down that path.
Okay, and I know I asked this in the back, but I want to ask it again. So the fracking water, at one point, characters are selling the fracking water. Is this the water that has been used for fracking on their land?
So you can like sell your well water to be used for, because they use a lot of water to bust up the rock to extract the natural gas. So it requires a lot of water.
So you can choose.
And then the water is not reusable after it's been used to fracture the shale.
Okay, so this is incredible given the drought that the novel is set within and the background of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
First off, that was so fascinating. I had no clue that people could buy the mineral rights under your feet. And I'm from Texas, so this is something I'm going to make note of. For me, my research also was a lot of fun because I got to do a lot of the things I loved and then call it work. For example, for researching for the heist aspects, I watched a lot of heist movies. I watched a lot of the Fast and Furious franchise for the street racing. And then, the whole time I got to call it studying and research. And I also work as a tour guide at a museum. And so that was a lot of fun because I got to walk around with my badge and scope out all the security cameras and all of that and, get to do my work, but also do some research for my book. And the people who work at the museum with me recently told me that they had started reading my book. So I had to tell them, I promised that, a lot of it is fiction. The robbing the museums part is made up.
They don't have to worry about you. Did you get to drive a Lamborghini or a Bugatti?
Oh my gosh, I'm hoping they'll call me up after, all these important people read my book. They'll say, thank you for the advertisement. We'd like to invite you around.
Okay, well, we should now go into then the fact that it's in production with Netflix. So we should talk about that, and we should talk about the Tony Hillerman Award, because it seems like maybe with a Netflix series you can have this chance.
I'll put in a request. So my book was optioned for Netflix, which means that they hold the TV rights for it and are in development. I signed a lot of paperwork, so I'm not sure how much I can share, but I will say that I was in LA a few weeks ago, and I got to meet with the Netflix team, and they seemed very excited about it. A big reason why I chose the team out of the few options that I had was because they said how important it was to maintain the core themes of the book in terms of making sure that the characters and their identity and their backgrounds were accurately reflected in the show. And so they're very passionate about representation and making sure that it's true to the story, and I really love their vision, so I'm excited about the direction that things are going.
I'm glad to hear that, because you present so many different pictures of the Chinese American experience through these students. It's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's hear about the Tony Hillerman Award.
just have to say that's so exciting because when I was reading, I was like, man, I can just see this, like the start of a movie. Like it felt like the opening to like Ocean's 11. It was really cool. So
I watched the opening to Ocean's 11, and then I was taking notes.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see it. So that's great. I think they're making a Tony Hillerman adaptation for one of the major networks. Nothing to do with my book, but I'm excited to see the Tony Hillerman series brought to film because those are such a great series set in New Mexico, and so that's kind of the prize is run by his daughter, who now writes the continuing series based on his characters. And the Western Writers of America, and my publisher, St. Martin's Minotaur. And it's for best first mystery set in the Southwest. So Texas or New Mexico, Arizona. And I decided to submit my manuscript, and then about, I think 6 months later, I got a call from a New York number that I didn't know, and so I ignored it, of course. But I'm glad I did call them back.
Did they leave a message?
He did leave a message, yes.
Saying you have won this award?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a great day.
It's a big award. When we lived in Nevada for a few years, and I read many of Tony Hillerman's books there because the setting was perfect, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I always like to ask this question. I'm curious, which character you most enjoyed writing and why?
Well, I think that probably who I had the most fun with was either Annie's cousin or her grandfather, Leroy. Probably her grandfather. He provides some comic relief, but also he is someone that she loves very deeply, and so having that, both him be a little bit of a relief to kind of a dark story, but also getting to get into his background and show the relationship was something that I really enjoyed writing.
He's such a complex character. So he's this wonderful, loving, wry granddad who is also an alcoholic, and he solves mysteries, and he goes to the VFW, and he's an incredible dancer. Anyhow, I felt like I knew this man. He reminded me actually a lot of my own granddad.
Oh, thank you.
But he didn't solve mysteries.
So my novel has 5 main characters and 5 points of view, and I think that the character that I started with was Will, who we heard from in the opening, who is an art history student at Harvard. He loves art, but is also very afraid of pursuing it because he doesn't know whether he's any good. He's afraid if he puts all of himself into it and still fails, where will that leave him? And so he has a lot of my ambitions and a lot of my fears. And because of that, I think he is very close to my heart, and I loved writing him. But probably my very favorite character to write is his younger sister, Irene, who is incredibly competent. She's a public policy major. She and Will have a very complicated sibling dynamic because they love each other very much, but are also constantly trying to one-up each other. And as the oldest of 3 siblings, I love writing siblings, and I had a lot of fun imagining what it was like to be a younger sibling and to feel that kind of push and pull tension.
Yeah, you nailed the sibling relationship. And I love that they both admired each other so much. Each of them thinks that the other one is capable of anything and feels lessened in their sibling's shadow. And Irene, she's intimidating. She is. There were sections where I was like, okay, we're going to read another Irene section. I feel like I need to sit up straighter and put my lipstick on,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it was so fun writing her. I love when people are so competent and so confident in their ability to, pull anything off, but also have that bit of vulnerability that maybe they're afraid to think too much on.
All right. How about the role of place in these novels? It's so interesting. I love this pairing, right? Because in Pay Dirt Road, it's this tiny little Texas town, and our main character, it's claustrophobic for her. She almost feels as if she can't breathe. She's not sure that she should stay. And then in Portrait of a Thief, we have characters who belong in two places, right? They belong in China and they belong in America. They're Chinese American, but they often feel that they're not accepted by either place. So I would love to talk about place.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such a fun question and a fun conversation for us to have because, of the 5 characters in the book, one of them is also from a small town in Texas. And that character, Lily, reflects a lot of my own experiences growing up in Pearland, Texas. And so as I was writing this book and thinking about these 5 different characters, and there are many different experiences, I wanted to think about what the Chinese American experience means and how it varies across geography and class and how your parents raise you to think about your own identity. And so we have characters who are very comfortable navigating these 2 worlds and very comfortable being Chinese American. And then we also have characters who never quite feel like they belong. And that often was me growing up, in Texas, getting asked questions about where I was from or compliments on my English. And and so I really enjoyed writing about it because I got to think about different parts of my own journey where there are characters who are still coming to terms with who they are, and I got to take them along on the journey and think about my own childhood, but also characters who are very comfortable just existing and moving throughout the world.
Yes, I love the contrast between like Lily and Irene, for example. That was just fantastic. Lily's the drag racer, and she was one of my favorite characters in the book. Yeah, it was great. And well, you should tell us the difference. Tell us about the difference between Lily and Irene.
So Lily and Irene are roommates, and so Irene is our con artist and public policy major who was born and raised in the Bay Area and is very comfortable with her identity. And then we have her roommate Lily, who grew up in Galveston, Texas, which is about an hour from where I grew up. It's a very small beach town, and her parents didn't grow up speaking Chinese with her. She was never really comfortable with her identity. She always just desperately wanted to fit in and find a place to call home. And so the 2 of them go on different but parallel journeys of discovering themselves, both in terms of identity and opening up and vulnerability in different ways.
I also was interested in thinking about identity and place and how that can feel, stifling. Like you said, Ginger. Annie, when she comes back, she has a conversation with her cousin who lives and works in the town. Her whole family's there, but about how she kind of, everybody has this attitude that she must hate it because she has gone away to college out of state and was, not looking back. But it's more complicated than that for her. She also loves it because she loves the people that are there. And so that push and pull was, I think, a good way for me to explore her desires and her ambitions. And also the small town setting was, it involves the solving of the crime and that gossip and who people perceive you to be in a small town where everybody knows everybody can impede a fair investigation. And so I'm not trying to give out way too much, but I think that, the role that a small town particularly plays on the solving of the crime was interesting to me because the woman who goes missing, she is someone that people are eager to forget about maybe, or eager to blame for what happened to her. And having grown up in a small town, that setting was very familiar to me, and I also feel kind of ambivalent about the places that I grew up. Love them, but also, moved to a big city. So it's a little bit of both.
The people wanting to blame her for what happened to her is a larger theme in the book too. Women grappling with how to relate to, well, mostly instances of sexual abuse, right? And how that ties into coming of age. And do you want to say anything about that?
Sure, yeah. I think that an issue that I wanted to explore was just, consent generally. There's the part about like the fracking and taking away what you believe to be yours, or the lack of control that a lot of young women experience with. There's assault, or comes pretty early in the book, so I guess I can say it, like a revenge porn situation with images on the internet being circulated. So those issues that, and then of course everybody you've known your entire life knowing all about these situations seem to be kind of it would reach a boiling point pretty quickly for a crime to happen, so.
Okay, so we've talked about the character that you most enjoyed writing. You know what's coming next. So who did you least enjoy writing, and why?
Least enjoy? I'm not sure. I honestly really had a lot of fun writing this book. And not to say that it wasn't hard to write the book. I guess writing Leroy's former partner in the sheriff's department. Her name is Mary Pat. She was a little bit harder for me to get on the page because her character is very reserved, and so I almost felt like she was hiding out from me a little bit too. When I was putting her on the page, she was hard to draw out.
I can see that. She is. You did her very well.
Thank you.
Well, this is a hard question to answer because, of course, all my characters have a bit of myself, and so I love them all, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that in terms of challenging while writing, I actually had some difficulty when I started writing Lily, because she does share so many similarities with me. She grew up in small town Texas. She struggled a lot with her identity. And so even though it was ultimately very rewarding to talk about her journey toward being more comfortable with herself, I also had to think back on a lot of my own experiences growing up and a lot of the fears and insecurities that I had back then. And so I kind of had to step back into a place that I had left behind years ago and imagine how difficult and painful it was to live while not quite knowing where I belonged or if I belonged anywhere. And so that started off very challenging, but ultimately it was a joy to get to the ending.
Well, she's also a wonderful character, yeah. And doing that during the pandemic, no less. At least everyone got to go to Paris. So we are ready for audience questions. If there's anything that you would like to ask of our wonderful authors, please come up to one of the microphones on either side.
Get your second question ready. Get your second question ready. So one of the questions I always like to ask authors, and Ginger's kind of alluded to it with character, but the darlings that you had to kill, because there's editing processes that go on, and it used to be the blue sheets where people would just mark through, but were there things that you were either asked to take out or that you ended up taking out because it didn't work? And like many authors, have you kind of put those in a drawer to use for later? So yeah, I see I'm getting that smile, and we know you were under contract too, so.
It's a good question.
That is a good question. I think that my tendency while writing, even though crime fiction particularly is very plot driven, I love characters, and my weakness is writing these moments of character introspection or character conversations where they sit around and not much happens, but they learn something about themselves, or they have a really nice conversation. And so there were several times throughout the book where I would write a scene like that, and then I would sit back and I would think, and I thought, I love the scene, but really there's nothing happening in it. And so the whole time it was a juggle between how do I, toss the scene, or how do I rework it so that they're both having this very fun conversation, they're learning more about themselves, but also maybe they're planning out something for the heist, and so that things continue to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes when you're writing crime fiction, you need to always keep the pace up, and so you have to be kind of vicious with the cutting. I think my biggest one that I kind of held on to was the title was not originally Pay Dirt Road. It was called the name of the VFW bar and the honky tonk that Annie and her grandfather Leroy go to is called Yesterday Once More. And so I wanted to call the book that, but it was, not edgy. It doesn't sound like a thriller. And so, but I was like, well, I'm just going to keep it the name of the bar. That was like my thing that I held on to. But yeah, that was one that I knew it wasn't going to work out. And I like the title, Pay Dirt Road. I'm happy with what we ended up on. But that was my one thing that I had to cross off.
I want to go to the VFW on the night it becomes a honky-tonk. On Thursday nights, they play all of the old classics, the old classic country music and dance. It sounds great. You both completely nailed, though, the literary thriller, right? The literary crime novel, because the pacing is there. I couldn't stop turning the pages, but the characters are whole and complex. Every character in both of your books, nobody is just serving a role. And then the plot is there, right? And the themes are there. These really big, as we've discussed, these very large themes. So,
thank you.
Super well done. Anyone else?
I have another character question, mostly because I'm fascinated with the writing process and how it differs for authors, because it's a gift I don't have. But I'm just curious, did any of your characters ever surprise you? Did you have characters that you thought were going to work a certain way in your story or behave in certain ways, and then as you were writing them, you just found they weren't behaving? Did they take on new lives as you created them?
I think that originally when I was starting out with the book, Leroy, the grandfather, he wasn't as big of a character in the story, but I believe just because I had so much fun writing him that he acted out, I guess, and showing up more a little bit. It's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, when I start writing, I always write out a list of all the characters, and then I start off with two questions, which is, what do they want versus what do they need? And that forms the overall framework for how I view the characters in the story. And it means that going in, I feel like I know them, but at the same time, as I'm writing and having their conversations with each other, I'm constantly surprised by the way they'll act, new things that will happen. Towards the end of the book, at one of the last few scenes, there's a conversation that when I plotted it out, it never happened. So everything, of course, as all books, everything falls apart in the third act. And so I had one very specific vision for how things would fall apart. And then I got there, and then I realized that something else was going to happen because of who the characters had become and how their relationships, intersected with each other, that not only would we have this big plot-related conflict, but we would also have a big character-related conflict.
How about you, Samantha? Did your ending end up being the ending you thought you would get?
I always kind of, knew that, it's funny, I kind of knew the ending when I started out, but the middle was, very blurry for my vision. There was a change at the end, a fairly sizable change that kind of took me by surprise, but in thinking about this book as part of a series that it needed to happen, and so it was. I think it was the right decision. I'm sorry I'm being so vague. It's like right at the end, so I can't say too much about it. But yeah, that was a big surprise there in the editing process.
Are we being given time? Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, good. Then I can ask what you're working on now.
You go ahead.
So I am working very slowly on something new, and it is set in the Bay Area, and it's also, this time instead of college students, it's about medical and graduate students, and it involves a lot of academic rivals and people working in the same lab and the tensions that arise there, but also it's inspired by the true story of the US government falsely accusing Chinese American scientists of espionage. And because both my parents are scientists and it's an experience that they're very familiar with and their friends have dealt with, I am really excited to be thinking about this, because I think the things that always get me in storytelling is when I take something that is true or could be true and then write it in a way that isn't what's going on in the real world but feels true to myself. And so I'm very excited. I'm working very slowly, but something new, also inspired very loosely by a true story.
Wow, that sounds really good. I can't wait to read it. My second book in the series, with Annie McIntyre as the main character, now she's an official PI in the second book. It comes out this coming April of 2023. It's called Hard Rain, and it's also set in Garnett, Texas. And the story takes place right after a historic flood really destroys the town, and the river rises, and a woman who becomes Annie's client is stranded she's caught in the river in the floodwaters and is rescued by a stranger before he gets swept downriver, and she hires Annie to find out who this person is, to thank him. And when Annie goes to search for this person, she instead finds somebody else who has been murdered and left in the floodwaters. And so she's grappling with if this person that she's searching for is really a hero or if they're a killer.
Okay, I want to read both of these. So I think we're at time, everyone. Oh, are you coming up to ask a question? No, let's take this question.
I wasn't actually going to have a question, but I just wanted to make a comment and express my gratitude. You're both writing about themes that are very appealing to me, sort of the precariousness of being, on the one hand, in being revealed in vulnerability, in identity, and the landscape. And I think those are just really great ways into really meaningful work. So thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
You'll love these books. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was wonderful being with all of you tonight. Grace and Samantha, it was such an honor to be here with you. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you both, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ginger, for moderating this wonderful conversation. Thank you to all of you for coming.
Once again, thank you all so very much for coming. And of course, another wonderful round of applause for Ginger for stepping in and just doing a magnificent job this evening, leading this conversation. So, of course, on behalf of the Decatur Book Festival and all of our sponsors and First Baptist Church, thank you all for sharing this evening with us. Acapella Books is outside and already has some signed copies if you'd like to purchase either of these books. The authors will be hanging out here on the rostrum for a few minutes in case you need a signature, but all the books are pre-signed and ready to go for you all. We will see you all here next Thursday and, of course, back in October for the Book Festival. Have a wonderful evening, Thank you all so very much.